Well, their president says he wants to wipe Israel off the map. But Iran's threat of a nuclear strike goes way beyond the Middle East, comes right here to us in America. Iran's leaders say they want to keep talking, but can we take them at their word? We're going to talk about that with KT McFarland, who served as a national security advisor to Presidents Nixon and Ford, also served in the Reagan administration, and Jed Babbin, former Deputy Undersecretary of Defense for President Bush 41. KT and Jed, thank you both for being here today. When I'm reading the papers on any given hour, not just day, my heart's skipping a beat. I'm watching what is going on in Iran. And I don't know if a lot of Americans fully understand that the single most important issue that is taking place on our planet right now, as important as healthcare is, it may be what is happening in Iran with their buildup of enriched uranium with the possibility of creating a weapon.
Right.
Why is that so dangerous, and why does it matter to Americans, KT?
Okay, because Iran is definitely going for the bomb. I mean, that's clear. They've been caught red-handed a week ago with a second nuclear enrichment site. They're going for it. So what does that mean? If Iran gets nuclear weapons, then there's a nuclear arms race in the Middle East. As Saudi Arabia, Egypt, Syria, Turkey all rush to get nuclear weapons. So that's like throwing a match in a gasoline-filled room. The other alternative is that Iran looks like it's getting there. We can't have an effective negotiations with them. Israel potentially preempts Iran's nuclear program, again unleashing a real disaster in the Middle East, but not as bad as a nuclear Iran which threatens America.
And Jed, if Israel were to do the preemptive strike, and a lot of assumptions are that they will do this before they allow Iran to get the weapon, what does the United States do at that point? Because it's not going to be a very popular decision on the part of Israel, but we've been about the only friend they've had.
Yeah, I think it's going to happen very quickly, Governor. I think to build on a little bit on what KT has said, there's only two choices here. Either a military strike or accepting Iran as a nuclear power. We're not going to negotiate with them, and to think otherwise is just to go against history. These guys have been in power for 30 years. No one has ever conducted a successful negotiation to change their behavior. What happens, and I do believe Israel is going to strike before the end of this year, I think what you're going to see is a very violent 48 hours. If the Israelis manage to get through it without suffering mass casualties, I think things will then calm down a bit. If the Israelis look like they're going down, I don't believe this president will intervene to save them. And I think that at that point, the Arab states, who also hate Iran, the Persians, they may also very well jump in against Israel.
See, I don't know. I mean, I don't know about that it's only a 48-hour window, and if we survive that, we're okay, because I think Iran would retaliate by mining the Strait of Hormuz, through which 40% of the world's oil flows, which means, you know, if you thought $5 a gallon of gas was expensive, you know, start adding a zero, because that would just shoot the price way up.
If they create the blockade, products can't get out. But the problem Iran has, they don't have gasoline. They have oil, but they don't refine.
Bingo.
But the problem is we have exercised no real muscle with the Russians or the Chinese to create the kind of coalition. In fact, we just gave something away to the Russians and got nothing out of it.
Right.
I don't understand the strategy behind the administration in terms of we're looking at an increasingly volatile situation in Iran, and rather than creating this very powerful coalition with the Russians and perhaps the Chinese, we're giving stuff away.
Well, I never thought I'd live to see the day where the president of France is chastising the president of the United States for being an appeaser. That's just a cultural shock to me I can barely handle. But at the risk of being serious, this is a real problem. This man and the Olympic failure is just another example of it. He believes that by his sheer personal charm, he can change things. You know, I don't believe his power is that great. It's failed again and again and again. And the Obama diplomacy is not very well respected. It's not something that people respond to. So, again, we're not going to go negotiate with Iran. And, you know, KT and I can go back and forth. I think that our Navy can keep the Straits of Hormuz open. But the problem really is going to be what else they turn on, Hezbollah, Hamas, and all the other terror groups that they sponsor
all the
around
sleeper
the world.
cells they may have throughout the world, including the United States.
I think one of the things we have to be concerned about is that even though Iran doesn't possess long-range missiles that could hit our shores, they could put something in a fishing boat just off the coast. But more importantly, the sleeper cells that exist that we've just seen in terms of recent things here in the U.S. could be uncorked, and that would be incredibly dangerous.
Now, there is one thing that we may potentially do, which is crippling sanctions.
We've got to take the break, and then we're going to start right. We're back with KT McFarland and Jed Babbin. We're talking about the very unique and sometimes explosive and dangerous, volatile situation that we have in Iran. KT, you were in the middle of a thought, and I so rudely interrupted you to go to the break, so I'm going to let you.
There is one
right
shot
back.
we have, which is crippling sanctions. It may not work, but we should impose them immediately. What we should not do is be lulled into this sense of the Geneva negotiations that are now ongoing to then delay any sanctions, because what the Iranians are doing is playing out the clock. They're just luring us along, and in 18 months they say, bingo, you know, we've got nukes. And so crippling sanctions now that we would let up on if the Iranians change their behavior.
And Jed, I know I've read some things that you have spoken or perhaps written in Human Events, publication of which you were the editor. One of the things that you have said, which is pretty bold, is that you can't blame all of this on Obama, that the previous administration didn't put some force in place against Iran when we really should have been bankrupting them so we don't have to bomb them. Now we may not have an option.
Right, and at this point, we really don't. I mean, with all due respect to KT, there's no sanction that can be made because the one sanction that would work, the cutoff of gasoline exports, Russia is pumping more. Venezuela just announced they're going to send more gasoline, so we're not going to be able to do that. But yes, Mr. Bush has to suffer some of the blame for this. Indeed, Mr. Clinton does too. In fact, if you ask a lot of the historians that look at this stuff, Iran has been lying to us about their nuclear weapons program since about 1981, give or take. So there's a lot of blame to go around. In the olden days, which I'll define as the Bush 43 administration at this point, we actually had the opportunity to fund and fuel a revolution. The young people there don't like this regime. I believe that window has closed. I don't believe we have the time to do that anymore. Right now we have to act, and I just don't think we have.
Because we're talking about 18 months. We're not talking about 5 years from now. We're talking about 18 months between now and when Iran gets the bomb.
And I think you're also bringing up, too, that there was a moment, that opportunity after the election when Ahmadinejad was put back in power under what appeared to be a fraud, and the people went to the streets. And if the United States and the rest of the free world could have given them some encouragement, they didn't have to go in militarily, it might have been enough to put some oxygen to the flame, but instead we said, that's none of our business.
Well, you know, I went back and looked at my old boss, Ronald Reagan. When Poland was going through a very similar period in the early 1980s, when they had their labor union movement, Solidarity was just starting, Reagan continually encouraged them and said, go for it, do it. And compare that to what President Obama did, which was one big silent treatment for a reform movement.
As I said, he put more pressure on the Israelis not to let 20 Jewish families move into the Shepherd Hotel than he did on the entire Iranian government for killing 20-year-olds in the streets after the elections. We got to turn the corner. We don't have a lot of time left, but we got to touch Afghanistan. This has been a historic week. We learned that General McChrystal has only had one conversation with the president. Then they finally have a conversation. White House is leaking stuff like a broken pipe to the Washington Post, saying that the president may not follow the advice of his general. What does this mean for the U.S. and for Middle East policy? What I'm afraid of is we're going to see a McChrystal light formulation.
Yeah, and that's the worst of all worlds.
Exactly, because if they put in fewer people than the general wants, it's going to create a higher risk to the American troops on the ground. We're going to end up losing more people than if we went in big. I'm not a fan of nation building, so I'm not really sure that the bigger strategy will work either. But the fact of the matter is, right now, McChrystal light is the worst possible.
And you know, this is the thing. The military said after Vietnam, never again are we going to have our political leaders tell us to do something we know we can't do militarily. And yet that's exactly what happened in Iraq when Rumsfeld sent in just enough troops to prevent defeat, but not enough to prevail. And here we are again, where the hand-picked military officer is saying, you know, Mr. President, I need 40,000 more troops. And if we try to cut the difference, split the difference, it's the worst of all because it bleeds. It's a slow bleed, and it's the worst for the American military.
A yes or no question to each of you as we close. McChrystal said he's got to have 40,000. That's just to be able to stay within the boundaries of winning. If he doesn't get it, does he resign and pull a MacArthur and say, that's it, I can't do something?
I think he should, yeah. Because otherwise it's the lives of American men and women.
Jed, what do you think?
I think he will, and I think that's at least even money that General Petraeus will as well. McChrystal is his protege. Those two guys have the guts to say, Mr. President, I can't do it, and lay down their stars.
That would be huge, a very huge thing. KT McFarland, Jed Babbin, thank you.